What's up? It's Susie from Hey Grill Hey, and today I'm going to take you guys through a process for a very simple smoked brisket flat. We get this question a lot on our social media channels and messages from you saying, yeah, we love the whole brisket, but what if we just want to do a flat? I'm going to give you guys a quick and simple same day brisket flat with a ton of flavor, a ton of moisture, and it's pretty easy. So let's do it. Before we jump into this recipe, I want to take a quick second to give you guys a word from our sponsors. Oh, hi, it's me. Hey Grill Hey doesn't really take sponsors, but we love when you guys watch our videos, and we especially love when you support our brand and our business by supporting our products. We have our Hey Grill Hey line of rubs and sauces at the store. You can find them at heygrillhey.com, or we would love to have you join the Grill Squad. It's my online barbecue university, essentially, where I take you step by step through a lot of the things that you need to know to become a backyard barbecue hero. To the recipe. Let's talk for a second about brisket flats. Now, a real whole brisket is made up of two muscle components, the flat and the point, or sometimes it's called the decal. The point is really fatty, it's really juicy. That's typically what burnt ends are made from. And the flat is definitely a bit leaner. This is typically what you'll see if you're doing something cured, like for pastrami, or you want to do thinner slices for sandwiches. That comes from the point. Usually we cook them all together for my Texas style smoked brisket. It's one of the most popular recipes and tutorials on my channel, on my website, but brisket flats are really easily available, and a lot of times they're more affordable than buying a whole brisket. Plus they're smaller, so they cook a bit quicker, and the intimidation factor is lower. Also, if you're not feeding like 15 people, maybe you just need a 5 to 6 pound flat, and that's what we have here. And we're gonna turn it into something really juicy, really smoky, really delicious, and it's not super complicated, but we wanna start with the trimming process. So let's get this guy out of the bag and start trimming it down. All right, you can see on this brisket flat, right here is where they've taken the point most of the way off. It actually still has a little bit of the point left on here. What I'm gonna start by is trimming this top fat cap down to about 1/4 of an inch thick. I'm gonna trim off this little tail here on the end and some of the corners because we want a really uniform thickness across our brisket. It'll make for much better and easier cooking. Okay, these meaty pieces right here, I'm actually gonna save these. They're great for using in ground beef. I actually have a video on using your brisket trimmings to make brisket burgers that are amazing. This fat I'm actually going to discard. It's not the hard fat that I typically use for making tallow, like if I'm trimming down a whole brisket, but that way you can really utilize what you already paid for with the meat itself. Flip it over, repeat on the back side, and we're gonna take off anything really stringy or fatty until we get a nice, clean brisket flat. Our brisket is trimmed the way that I like it. When I'm doing Texas style briskets, I usually don't take this much fat off of the top, but this is a slightly different cooking method. We're going hotter and faster, and we're gonna inject this guy with some beef broth and some Worcestershire sauce to give us some additional flavor. I don't think a thick layer of fat is necessarily as needed as it is on just the flat as it would be on a whole brisket. Speaking of our injection liquid, I've got about 1 cup of beef stock here. I'm gonna shake in a couple tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. You could really play with the injection here and use some beer. You could use some apple juice if you like things a little bit sweeter, or there's some really cool injections on the market that are really popular in the competition barbecue space that have phosphates in them that really retain a lot of moisture and add a lot of flavor. It's not something I typically do for a backyard brisket, but that is an option. And then we're just gonna inject our brisket, starting at one end, working our way to the other, and injecting your needle about every 2 to 3 inches across the surface of your brisket. Brisket is injected all over the place. I'm gonna season on both sides with my beef barbecue rub. If you don't have this, you can use equal parts coarse kosher salt coarse black pepper and garlic powder. It won't taste exactly the same, but it'll give you a really great flavor profile because you don't need a ton with beef and with brisket, and the smoke's gonna add a lot of flavor too. You'll also notice I didn't use a binder. With my traditional Texas style brisket, I do use yellow mustard as a binder. I think it helps the rub stick. We have a lot of moisture on this brisket from the injection. I really don't think that an additional binder is necessary with this one. Brisket is seasoned. We've got our smoker preheated to 275 degrees. We're doing a mix of oak and cherry today. It's my favorite combination for brisket, but anything beef really. It adds a great oaky flavor, and that cherry color is beautiful. So we're gonna let this roll for the next 5 or 6 hours. We're looking for an internal temperature of about 165 degrees, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now, fat side up or down is always an argument when it comes to brisket. I think a lot of it depends on the smoker you're cooking with, and it doesn't make a huge difference with this flat specifically because we trimmed so much of the fat cap off. But on my pellet smoker, I'm going to go fat side down. We do have the firebox underneath the brisket, and I think the little bit of fat that is there can help protect the brisket just a little bit from drying out across the bottom. Okay? So we're about 3 hours into our brisket flat smoke. It's reading about 145 to 150. And if you look at it closely, it's actually kind of juicy on the outside. And that is partially the injection that we put in kind of seeping out as those muscle fibers tighten. But that's why I'm not spritzing. I don't have a water pan in here. We added a bunch of moisture with that injection. It doesn't need anything additional. And we're not quite ready for the wrapping phase yet because I want that bark to dry a little bit more, to tighten a little bit more, and to push us up closer to that 165 internal temperature mark. I'll probably come back out and check again in a half hour to an hour. Ready?
Yep.
Our brisket's been smoking for about 4 hours, right at that 165 temperature point that we're shooting for, and we are going to wrap. Sometimes this is called a Texas crutch. You can either use foil or butcher paper for this, depending on your preference. Foil will cook a little bit faster, give you slightly more of a pot roasty type of flavor. Butcher paper is my favorite. It's a little more breathable. It helps with the bark development and it retains moisture. I do have a video comparing like side by side of all the ways to crutch your brisket that you should check out if that's something you want to deep dive into. But today we're gonna wrap ours in butcher paper. Brisket's on the paper. I'm gonna drizzle this with a little bit of beef tallow. I have a video on how to render your own beef tallow or a recipe on the website. I usually use my brisket trimmings for it, but you can also use ghee, which is a clarified butter. It comes from cream and it separates all of the proteins out that could potentially burn during the higher heat cooking process. Either of those fats will work, but adding fat to a brisket, especially a flat that it's already a little bit lean, helps a ton with both moisture and flavor. I think that was probably a 1/4 cup total, and then we're gonna wrap it up tightly and get it back on the smoker. All right, brisket on the smoker. We're gonna let this roll for the next few hours. I'm assuming it'll take about 3, but I'm gonna start checking in 2. We only have 30 degrees to go to where I wanna start testing for texture and doneness. 195 degrees Fahrenheit is really where those tight connective tissues start to break down and gelatinize and give us the tenderness that we're looking for. So that's our initial temperature check, is that 195. We might not take it off till it's above 2, but we want to start checking at that point just to make sure we don't overshoot the mark and dry out our brisket. Our brisket has been on for just about 2 hours. At that 195 point, it still felt a little bit tough, so I let it go for another 15-20 minutes. Right now we're riding between like 199 and 202 across the top of the brisket, and it feels really nice. My thermometer is sliding in and out very gently, but it still has, you know, some ooey gooey texture to it. It's not fall apart. I'm excited. We're gonna pull it off and let it rest for about 45 minutes to an hour before we slice it up. Even when I pick it up and give it a little bend and a squeeze, it's got a really beautiful give to it. 202 degrees is obviously too hot to slice and serve and eat a brisket. We're just gonna let this go at room temperature. Well, outside it's hotter than room temperature, it's warm today. But in about 45 minutes to an hour, it should be a beautiful serving temperature at about 155 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit internal, and then we can eat it. My mouth is watering. It is about 4:30. We started this beautiful brisket flat this morning at around 9:30. So I would say not bad for a 7-hour same day smoke. If you wanted to let this rest for another hour or so, you totally could have it ready for a nice 5:30 dinner. But look at the juice coming off of this brisket. And this is just a choice grocery store brisket flat.
So you had a towel.
Ooh, oh, it's moist. The grain on this brisket is running this direction, which means if I wanted to go 100% against the grain, I would start at this corner right here and slice diagonally. However, I like the consistency and the look of it slightly straight, which means that our grain is gonna be running at a slight diagonal, but still short. It's not gonna be long strands. The most important thing that you can do is really shorten those strands as you slice, so every bite is a little bit more tender than it could be if it was with the grain. Okay, ready? This brisket, this is a 4-camera brisket. All right, I'm gonna load up my platter with all of my favorite barbecue sides. I've got some pickled jalapenos, some classic dill pickles, and then of course some fresh sliced white onion. If you've got white bread, you can load that on your platter as well. And no great brisket needs a sauce, but I love having a little bit of sauce to dunk some bites of my brisket in, or alternate, or if I'm making a brisket sandwich, I really do love a little bit of barbecue sauce on there. And my Texas style brisket is, or Texas style barbecue sauce is the best barbecue sauce to serve alongside brisket. And just like that, we got a whole house full of kids to feed. I hope you guys give this recipe a try. It's super simple. It's a great weekday or weekend, same day smoke. Loads of flavor, loads of moisture, loads of tender, juicy, delectable brisket. Oh, it's the brisket bounce. You can catch this recipe along with hundreds of others on the Hey Grill Hey app or at heygrillhey.com. Thank you guys so much for your support. I hope we can do everything in our power to help you make better barbecue so you can feed the people you love and become a backyard barbecue hero. We'll see you next time. Oh, so good.